After recent roster moves, it's clear that several of the Carolina Panther rookies are going to have to be day one starters. We'll talk about that right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show right here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky, where I'm here with you on Fridays throughout the offseason, answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. What you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council, or at me over on Blue Sky, also at Julian Council, to get your questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. We have gotten to know all 8 of the Carolina Panthers draft picks from the 2025 NFL draft, and even got to know some of their undrafted free agents as a rookie minicamp was over the weekend. Now today, let's focus on the expectations for all 8 of the Panthers picks from 2025. And I got it broken down in 3 different categories: day one impact players, rotational players, and then guys who are possibly fighting for a spot on the roster here in 2025. Going to go all over that here on the show today, looking at the expectations, the fair expectations for the 2025 Panthers draft class. Starting off at the top with day one impact players. And the first guy we're going to talk about is obviously Tetairoa McMillan, who went 8th overall to Carolina, which was a surprise to me, a surprise to many of you, but also very clearly a need for the Panthers. I looked at the wide receiver core. I liked what they got back in Adam Thielen. I like what Jalen Coker and what Xavier Legette did as rookies last year, but I looked at it, and clearly to me, there was no one of the talent level on this roster to be a true number one wide receiver. And I know that Dave Canales said at the owners' meetings that they saw Xavier Legette as that wide receiver one, which maybe that was true. Maybe they truly believed that. And then once they got to the draft and they saw on their board, they could not get out of the 8th overall pick, that Tet McMillan was sitting there, and they had no choice but to take him and to follow their board. Maybe that's how it played out. But I've never bought the idea that Xavier Legette is going to be a top-tier wide receiver in the NFL. I know he had his ups and his downs in South Carolina before blowing up in his final year there in 2023. It's an awesome story. He's an awesome personality. Glad to have him here in Carolina. But the expectations, I never felt like should have been there for him last year to be eventually that guy. I always felt like they needed to find someone else to upgrade and truly replace DJ Moore and have that wide receiver one. And they have now done that, in my opinion, in taking Tetairoa McMillan 8th overall. And it's just this simple to me, y'all. The Panthers did not have a true wide receiver one, and McMillan was taken in the top 10. Guys who go into the top 10 of the NFL draft are expected to be franchise players. They're expected to be the pillars, the cornerstones of your organization. Look at the guys they've recently taken in the top 10. Derek Brown, J.C. Horn in 2020 and in 2021, respectively. Both of those guys have gone on to have successful careers, get the 5th-year option, and to be handed massive extensions. Derek Brown, a top 5 paid defensive tackle. J.C. Horn, for a week, was the highest paid defensive back in the history of the NFL. That's what we're talking about here, man. When you take a guy in the top 10, you're expecting him to get the 5th-year option and then to become one of the highest paid players at his position in the NFL. And looking at Ike Ekwonu, he was drafted 6th overall. He has played well, has not been a Pro Bowler to date at this point in time, but he is in line, like with Brown, like with Horn, to get paid big-time money. And considering that the cap keeps coming up, it's possible that he becomes one of the top paid left tackles in the NFL, even if you would question whether he is that. And if Bryce Young continues to do what he did in the second half of last season and carries it over to 2025, this time next year, he has the 5th-year option and quite possibly a big-time deal as the Panthers franchise quarterback. That's what you're expecting when a guy goes 8th overall, when a guy goes 7th overall, when a guy goes 6th overall, and when someone especially goes 1st overall in the draft. Top 10 pick has far greater expectations than a guy who goes 32nd overall there at the end of the first round. So why wouldn't I place high expectations on McMillan to be the wide receiver 1 in Carolina? We went over it on Friday, the numbers that Marvin Harrison Jr., that Roma Dunze, and that Malik Neighbors put up as rookies this past season in 2024. And by no means am I expecting him, that being McMillan, to have 1,200 yards receiving this upcoming season and to do what Malik Neighbors did last year, where he truly had to be the guy for the Giants. Certainly Wan'Dale Robinson, nice player. Darius Slayton, nice player. But I thought the opportunity was there immediately in New York, even with the quarterback questions with Daniel Jones, to step in and to be the guy. Similar to Marvin Harrison Jr. out there in the desert of Arizona, while Trey McBride at the tight end spot became a very nice story and became their top receiving option. Wide receiver options, clearly Marvin Harrison Jr. was that guy. Adam Thielen, still think he's got something left in the tank. Xavier Legette, I think he's going to be better this upcoming season. But as far as talent-wise and expectations, the wide receiver 1 on this roster should be Tetairoa McMillan. So, yeah, those are my expectations coming into this season. I said on Friday, 60 receptions, 850 plus yards, 6 touchdowns, and even talking to Damon Farrell yesterday, who covers Arizona, he was saying pretty similar numbers to what Marvin Harrison Jr. had put up last year, and I think that opportunity is there. So, yeah, man, he went 8th overall. He's a top 10 pick. This is supposed to be a franchise player. He absolutely needs to come in and earn that wide receiver 1 job by mid part of the season and run with it and put up those kind of numbers to help out Bryce Young and to elevate this offense. And he's not going to be the only person asked to come out there day 1 in this draft class to make a big impact. After the news on Thursday that Carolina's parting ways with Jadeveon Clowney, the veteran edge rusher, this is an extremely young edge rusher group. Everyone is 26 or 27 and younger when looking at it. DJ Wonnum immediately is the top guy in that room, missed half of last season because of blood clot issues when he came in there, that game in Munich, and even the game the next week against the Chiefs after the bye. He showed you some of the upside and the juice that he has, and had he been healthy, maybe he would have led the team in sacks a year ago. But I expect there to be a nice leap for DJ Wonnum as a fully healthy player this upcoming season. We'll see what Pat Jones gives them after he comes over from free agency. We'll see if DJ Johnson can finally do something. We'll see if Marquise Haynes, who pretty much missed most of last season because of a knee injury, if he can show you something in the final year of his rookie deal, if he makes the team. But the 2 guys Panthers invested in, and we're not willing to wait for, went up and got there on day 2, Nick Scourton and Prince McMillan from A&M and from Ole Miss, respectively. Both of those guys are going to have to come in and be impact players. And mostly it's going to have to be Nick Scourton. When you're a second-round pick, you're coming off of that all-SEC season, much like Umanmielen, but then you have the size to be a every-down edge rusher, and now you're losing Clowney, who could have been that for you as well, probably more in a rotational role this upcoming season, but still, that's the spot that Scourton has to step into. It's Scourton, it's Wonnum. Those should be your 2 starters at that edge rusher, that outside linebacker spot in a Ejiro Evero's 3-4 defense this upcoming season. So Nick Scourton, a lot of expectations on him to go out there and to be able to rack up sacks, be able to get those TFLs, and to be able to set the edge and stop the run. For Umanmielen, maybe not so much can be asked of him because he's not going to be a guy you want out there on 1st and 2nd down. But when it comes to 3rd down, if you're taking somebody off the field and you're putting him on there, you want him to go out there and to wreak havoc, get after the passer, and to really be that kind of guy who can lead to some pressures and some sacks this upcoming season. And Panthers need that. They were not a great pass rush, even with Clowney last year, and now losing your really only known commodity. And you could certainly try to say that Wonnum is that, but we have to see now as he steps into the role as kind of like the number 1 guy. And if DJ Wonnum is the number 1 edge rusher in your team, probably not the best situation pass rusher wise, but we'll see what he's able to do this season. But now you got Nick Scourton, you got Prince Umanmielen, both of those guys coming in. They're going to be asked immediately to step up and to fill the void, and not really just fill the void, but produce, go in there. And instead of waiting behind Clowney and getting less snaps this season, the Panthers said, let's move on. We invested in these 2 guys. We moved up to get them. Let's get them out on the field and get them some live reps and ready and have them actually play in NFL games and move forward at that edge rusher spot down the road. So I'm not weeping about the Clowney move at all. I wasn't really celebrating it last year when they made it. Never felt like he was going to be a replacement to Brian Burns, was never going to be a part of the long-term future. Nick Scourton, Princely Umanmielen, that's what they're here to do. To be replacements of Burns, to be a part of the future. So rip the Band-Aid off, move on, and let's see what these guys can do. So Tet McMillan, Nick Scourton, Princely Umanmielen, first 3 picks in this year's draft class, all 3 of them need to be day one impact guys, especially McMillan and Scourton and Umanmielen, needing him more in a third down situational pass rusher situation. But still, he's going to be called upon this upcoming season to be a prime performer for Carolina. And I'm excited to see what those guys can do. Now, rotational players, looking at 3 guys who were drafted later on. We'll talk about who they are and what their roles could be this upcoming season in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you think Anthony Edwards is going to continue to carry Minnesota and heat up, why not back it up with a same-game parlay? New to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Big expectations that I have for Tet McMillan, Nick Scourton, and Princely Umanmielen as day one impact players for the Panthers during their rookie seasons. What about the guys I view as rotational players as rookies coming up here in 2025? Looking at 3 right now, Lathan Ransom, the Panthers' 4th-round pick from Ohio State. Mitchell Evans, the 5th-round pick from Notre Dame. And Trevor Etienne, their first 4th-round pick there as well. Those 3 guys I see as being rotational players this upcoming season as far as like what the expectations should be for them. And starting off with Ransom, he's a part of a safety room that right now is incomplete. Can't really give it a grade as far as whether I think it is a good safety room, a okay safety room, a bad one. It's incomplete at this point in time because I just don't think they're ready to go into a season. And we're sitting here, it's the middle of May. So clearly they're not playing a game anytime soon. There's still time to add to that room. And when you move on from Jadeveon Clowney like they did last week, that opened up room to sign the Panthers draft picks, which that has all pretty much happened since then. But also it gave them room to go out there and to sign a veteran potentially to come in and start at safety next to Trevon Merrick, who they brought in during free agency from Las Vegas, but also someone who can maybe take a little bit of pressure off of Lathan Ransom and not ask him immediately to come in and to start. But it's possible that Carolina is going to ask him to start with Merrick and with Damani Richardson, the former UDFA from A&M a year ago, who took over as a starter to close out the 2024 season. That may be your trio, but I have a hard time believing that once we get to August, that this room's not going to look different. And it might not be at the beginning of August, but at some point in time, they will make a move. And we didn't know last year kind of that what it was going to actually look at like at that outside corner spot. They had JC here, of course. The thought was going to be Dane Jackson, and then it was going to be Troy Hill. But then you get to the season, and Dane Jackson, he's starting off the year on IR with the hamstring injury. The Panthers had traded for Mike Jackson. He ends up being that cornerback number 2. And then down the road, Troy Hill's not even on the roster midway through the season. So things can change. And the way the roster looks today is certainly not what the roster is going to look like completely once we get to October and November, once the season has started to play out and we've gone through at least halfway of it. So things can change. And I certainly think one of the things that will change is who's in that safety room and who's going to be called upon to be a starter. So I'm not sure whether Lathan Ransom will be asked to do that immediately. When we talk to Jay Stevens of Locked On Buckeyes, he feels like his role to start off should be as a special teamer, and he's a thumper. That's what Jay said. So that is something that is nice, knowing how poorly that safety room was able to tackle last year, which is a bigger reason why Merrick is now here in Carolina. Richardson was the best of their tacklers according to PFF last year in that safety room, and he returns for another year. Nick Scott can be more of a special teams guy this season. So there will be an opportunity for Ransom. I just, right now, sure, you can write him in there as like that third starting safety. Maybe he's the second starting safety above Richardson. But once we finally get to the preseason, I do think that it's going to look a little bit different, and that he won't be asked to be one of the guys, like the second guy, I guess, the guy right there in that secondary, in that safety room with Trevon Merrick. So we'll see how it plays out, but I'm expecting more of him to be in a rotational basis, special teams, more so than being called upon to be that week one starter and ready to go for all 17 games this season in that starting role at safety. Mitchell Evans, someone we talked about yesterday with Tyler Wojak of Locked On Irish. I look at him right now just based off of what he was able to do during his college career at Notre Dame as a blocker, starting out behind Michael Mayer and then ascending into a role as a marquee pass-catching tight end, leading the team and receiving in 2023. I think he led them maybe in receptions last year, but maybe not receiving yards in 24 on the way to a national championship appearance against Ohio State. He's somebody who's proven to be a solid blocking tight end and also a plus pass catcher. And what I've talked about is like a quintessential Notre Dame tight end. Love what Tommy Trimble's been able to do in Carolina and what he brings to this locker room, but he's a blocking tight end. Like, that's what he did at Notre Dame. That's why the Panthers drafted him to do. And you might look at it as like, okay, why did you take a guy in a third round to be a blocking tight end? Certainly good question to ask Scott Fitterer, who no longer holds a job as general manager here in Carolina, but he did draft a player who signed a second contract. And you look at all the guys that he drafted, you can't say that for the majority of them. Tommy's still here. JC's still here as well. Terrace Marshall, no longer here. Brady Christensen's here. Chuba Hubbard's here. So 4 of the 11 are still on the roster when it comes to second contracts. So Scott Fitterer didn't necessarily nail all of those picks, but he did do a good job in procuring Tommy Trimble and getting him to Carolina and having him be somebody who's been an impactful player in the run game, especially for the Panthers the last couple of years, where that's been, of all the areas where they've struggled, that's been at least a place where they've had moments where they've excelled. That's not completely been that way, but he's been a quality player for them. And you bring in JT Sanders, another year, second-year player, fourth-round pick from a year ago, more of a pass catcher, still questions as far as him coming along as a run blocker in general, but he has gotten better. And I do think that he still is somebody that's going to be a big part of the passing game moving forward. But you look at both of those guys, and do you want Tommy Trimble there on passing situations? Do you want JT Sanders out there on the field on running situations? Maybe you want to take them off depending on how things are playing out. Mitchell Evans, 3-down tight end, and a guy that Tyler Wojak believes can be a starter down the line. And I'm all for that. And I look at him as probably the most complete tight end just based off of his ability to be a run blocker and to also be someone who can catch the ball and do something with it. Yards after the catch has been missing in Carolina for a couple of years now with their pass catchers. So he's going to come in. And now that they moved on from Jordan Matthews, and there's some questions as far as who else may they bring up the street. May they try to bring in another veteran tight end to go in there with JT, with Tommy, now with Mitchell, quite possibly. And if they have 4, those are the 4 you rock with. You rock with Trimble, you rock with Sanders, you rock with Evans, and then whoever that vet tight end as well. But I look at him as absolutely being in a rotation and maybe even finding a way to ascend to a starting role, depending on how things play out this upcoming season. 1 year removed from the ACL, should be better off this year than he was last year at Notre Dame. I like that pick, and I'm very curious to see how that plays out, as this is a tight end room that has been among the worst in the NFL since Greg Olsen left for Seattle before retiring. The last guy we're looking at is a rotational player, Trevor Etienne. Make no mistake, Chuba Hubbard is RB1 in Carolina, and they bring in Rico Dowdle as a really solid RB2. You can try to look at it as a 1A, 1B situation, possibly. They paid Chuba a lot of that money. They want to, of course, preserve his body so that he can play out the entirety of that contract. And looking at the fact that Jonathan Brooks is on PUP, going to miss the entirety of the 2025 season, and we don't know what he's going to look like come 2026, they're going to need Chuba possibly to play out all 4 years of that deal. So Dowdle, he's here this season to take some of the pressure off of Chuba. He's coming off of a 1,000-yard rushing season, a career year, just like Chuba was last year. I like that duo, and those are the guys that you really should be leaning on this upcoming season. But as far as the role that Trevor Etienne could play in that backfield, it's clearly as that number 3 running back who can be a third down guy and catch the ball in the backfield. And Raheem Blackshear is someone who we had talked about in the past as being that and also being a returner. And that's kind of the role that Etienne's going to try to come in and play here in Carolina, where Blackshear didn't have the best numbers last season as far as a kick returner. And I know Jimmy Horn Jr., we're going to talk about him momentarily. He's someone who they're going to ask to do that as well. But Etienne, that's a pathway on the field, third downs pathway on the field. So Raheem Blackshear, he's going to be directly kind of fighting off this rookie, Trevor Etienne, as far as trying to make this roster and make an impact there as that third running back in the room. So it's Chuba, it's Rico. Those are the guys getting the bulk of the carries. But if you want to have a guy in third down to be a pass catcher, add some yards after the catch, that's clearly to be Trevor Etienne among that trio in the backfield that I mentioned in Hubbard, Dowdle, and Trevor Etienne. So those three guys, Lathan Ransom, Mitchell Evans, Trevor Etienne, looking at them as rotational players who have a chance, like Ransom and Evans, to maybe even become starters down the line as the season plays out. But those are my expectations for those three guys heading into 2025. There's two, though, remaining, and two I think who probably should be okay, but possibly could be fighting for a roster spot in 2025. We'll talk about them here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Talking expectations for the 2025 Panthers draft class. Talked about guys who should be day one impact players. Ted McMillan, Nick Scourton, Umanmielen. All three of those guys going to be needed from day one. Rotational players, Lathan Ransom, Mitchell Evans, Trevor Etienne. The possibility that Ransom and maybe Evans could turn out to be starters this upcoming season. And Etienne likely more of a third down back and a guy having to return kicks for the Panthers this upcoming season. Two more guys that the Panthers took in the 2025 NFL draft who I think may possibly be fighting for a roster spot, although they may be safe based off of the numbers the Panthers initially kept last year. We're talking about Cam Jackson, the 5th-round pick from Florida, and Jimmy Horn Jr., the final pick for the Panthers there in the 6th round of this past year's draft. Now, looking first at Jackson and just the defensive line in Carolina, Derek Brown, A'Shawn Robinson, Bobby Brown III, and Turk Wharton, I would say all four of those guys are locks to be on the roster this upcoming season. I mean, clearly, Brown's not going anywhere. Robinson was the best among a atrocious group, unfortunately, at that interior defensive line spot once Brown went down last year. They brought in Bobby Brown III in free agency to be that run stopper. They brought in Turk Wharton to be a rotational guy who can be an interior rusher for them as well to help out with that pass rush this season. All really good signings for the Panthers and what they want to do in that defense, especially when it comes to the interior, having those three guys rotate around Derek Brown. And you look at the numbers last season initially with the 53-man roster, they kept 7 on the defensive line. And you look at the other 3 guys that I would think that would probably fill out that 7-man defensive line rotation. It would be Shai Tuttle, who took a pay cut and is staying in Carolina. Jaden Crumedy, who they took last year in the 6th round from Mississippi State and pretty much redshirted the majority of last season before playing a couple of games to close out 2024. And then it'd be Cam Jackson. Like, those would be the 7, assuming that they go with all 3 of those options if the roster math works like that. But it's not always the case. So I look at it as you got those 4 in both the Browns. Derek Brown, Bobby Brown III, Robinson, Wharton, they're good. Tuttle maybe might be one of those vested veteran situations where his contract is guaranteed. If he's on the roster week 1, you may cut him in that situation. Crumedy, I don't know if they want to punt on that very early. It seems like this is an organization that at least has come out and said it, that they want to develop guys, and he had a lot of time to develop. Last year was an ankle that really set him back and led the Panthers to kind of put them out there on IR, give him some chances to practice, then brought him on late into the season. We'll see how that plays out, but I would not imagine they want to move on from him very early. And Cam Jackson, who they just took in the 5th round, and 5th round seems a little bit more secure when you first get taken than, say, the 6th round is when you first get drafted in the NFL. But if it's all 7, or if they take 7 again, I would think it'd be those guys. And if they only take 6, probably Tuttle would be the one who would likely be the odd man out, even though I do think that they would prefer to not outright lose him and find a way to bring him back later on here on the roster if that's how it works out. And I'd also have to look at the financials of all that, as when they moved around his salary cap hit, just his overall money. There may be some sort of dead money deal that may not help out Carolina. And I'm just looking at it right now. I mean, it's through post June 1, but they cut him post June 1. Well, they would save money. So maybe that's what they decide to do. We'll see. But I look at it as Cam Jackson. He's going to come in. He's known as a run stopper. That's what you have Bobby Brown III for. That's why you have Derek Brown. He's someone who rotate in every once in a while get that opportunity, but still, depending on just how the roster math and how that works out, could possibly be fighting for a roster spot. But I do think more likely to be safe than not, as long as he does all the right things, stays healthy, and it's a big piece of all of this, and is able to make the roster that way. Looking at Jimmy Horn Jr., the last of the 8 picks that the Carolina Panthers took last month at the NFL draft up in Green Bay. Like defensive line, the Panthers last year initially kept 7 wide receivers before cutting Amir Smith-Marset and cutting Jalen Coker. They, of course, brought back Jalen Coker. He became a key piece of that wide receiver core down the stretch, and I still think would be heading into the season. Now, there's way more competition at wide receiver this year than there was last year, where it was clearly going to be Adam as wide receiver 2. They traded for Deontay Johnson to be that wide receiver 1, and then there was Mingo here, but eventually Xavier Legette was going to take over and be that guy. Like, those were going to be your top 4, and eventually we saw Mingo get traded away. We saw David Moore, because of just things not working out with Johnson, the injury to Thielen, have to step up and be kind of that wide receiver 4, even wide receiver 3 at points in times. Coker, as I mentioned before, and as we all know, he came in really impressed as a guy who was undrafted, made the roster, was cut, then kept around, and that was also kind of a surprise that the Panthers were able to even retain him, and he was able to clear waivers, and he could be back on the roster on the practice squad. So I look at this year, Adam Thielen, Xavier Legette, Ted McMillan, those are your top 3. You took McMillan 8th overall. He needs to be your wide receiver 1, as I mentioned earlier in the show. Legette, that's the guy who you're looking at and who you would like to see ascend as that wide receiver 2. Honestly, like, Adam Thielen, good player, has been the Panthers' top wide receiver his 2 seasons in Carolina. But this is his final season. He's 35. You need the young guys to come in here and to be able to earn those roles, and to have the veteran move down to a lesser role. Like that, if you want to be a contending team, like a lot of y'all, obviously not a lot, all of y'all want this team to do and to be. Like, obviously, I want that to happen too, having to talk about them every single day. I don't want to talk about a losing team. I want to see a team have success and win. And I just don't think in 2025 you're doing that if Adam Thielen is one of your top 2 receivers. So Ted McMillan needs to come in immediately and to show what he can do and be that wide receiver 1. Xavier Legette needs to step up and have a better season than last year and not drop the ball in critical situations. And then Adam, be that vet presence there in the slot. Like, that's what I would like to see. Tet 1, Legette 2, Thielen 3. But those 3 guys, they're secure. Jalen Coker should be back on the roster again. But as far as what his role is going to be, like, that's up in the air, because there's serious competition behind those top 3. As Hunter Renfrow, he's now here. He dealt with a medical condition that actually started off in his final couple years there in Las Vegas, and he was not playing at that Pro Bowl level he played at a few years back. He didn't even play football last year as he was trying to figure out what physically was going on with him. He's now back home in the Carolinas, and if he's truly healthy, hard to see him not being an impactful player in that wide receiver room, of course, based off of what they're going to ask him to do. You look at also David Moore, he's coming back. Now there's younger guys like a Jimmy Horn Jr., who I think a lot of you would rather see in that role as a returner this upcoming season than David Moore, but Moore has a lot of experience with this coaching staff, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. It was Canales back in Tampa a couple years ago, his lone season as the OC, who brought David Moore off the street to play receiver late into that season for the Buccaneers. So they're not just going to move on from him willy-nilly. And this might be another situation, kind of like with Jai Tuttle, vested veteran. Do you want to guarantee his contract? Don't have him on the roster week 1, bring him back. I don't know how many teams in the NFL are going to be falling over themselves to claim David Moore off of waivers. Probably not any, but we'll see if that's how it plays out. So if he's not on there, maybe that allows a guy like Jimmy Horn Jr. the opportunity to instantly be on the roster. Kobe Hudson, Jacoby George, some undrafted guys who you can't sleep on as well, who could make sense for Carolina. But for Jimmy Horn Jr., he's going to have to fight, man. Because if everybody not named Adam Thielen, Xavier Legette, Ted McMillan, and even Jalen Coker, I think is probably going to be fine to make the roster. But as far as what his role is going to be, that is up in the air, as he's not really a special teamer in terms of returning kicks. So we'll see. But I think it's going to be real interesting to see how the roster map plays out for both Cam Jackson and Jimmy Horn Jr. I would expect that both of those guys are probably going to be fine to be on the roster, especially as rookies, unless they're just a complete disaster. Now, for Horn, it's going to be a little bit more difficult just based off of the competition in that room. But unless these guys are just complete disaster, I don't see Dan Morgan, Brant Tillis, Dave Canales punting on these guys in a few months' time here when they're initially cutting down the roster. And if they do, I'm sure they'll try to find a way to bring those guys back if they clear waivers later on after that. But those are my expectations for the Carolina Panthers 2025 draft class. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free over on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, where on Friday I'm back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me over on Twitter to get those questions into me now, or at me over on Blue Sky, also at Julian Council to get your questions. And in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And on tomorrow's show, we'll preview what the schedule could look like for Carolina. When do you want certain matchups to fall and all of that? That's coming up tomorrow here on Locked On Panthers.